just entered the theater of an alien sky. If the words and images seem strange to you, there's a reason for this. Our world was once a vastly different place. To experience this won't hurt you, and there is nothing to fear. In previous discourses, we've noted some of the remarkable ways the mythic ship of heaven contradicts all of the usual translations of Egyptian texts, the very texts that give us the most concrete information on this vehicle of the gods. Translators sought to accommodate the problem by mistranslating the literal meanings of Egyptian words. But the real problem has its source in the inescapable motion of the ship itself. The ship flatly refuses to cooperate with any solar interpretation. Why at the beginning of the ancient day was the ship described descending, while at the beginning of the ancient night it was rising? And why the consistent linkage of the descending ship with the left and the rising ship with the right? In fact, every detail of the cosmic ship becomes absurd the moment we attempt to relate the concrete language to the appearance of the sun in our sky. In following the literal evidence of a revolving crescent, we've noted the ship above in its phase of dimness and below in its phase of brightness. This consistent language holds vast implications for our understanding of the ancient sky. But it reverses every common assumption about the regions of the so-called day and night journeys of the ancient sun god. Historically, one misconception led inescapably to another. The regions above and below in the cosmic circuit invariably came to be translated as heaven and earth, a mistake that precluded any useful understanding of the ship of heaven. The two most frequently used Egyptian words for the regions above and below can be seen in the pairing of the concepts pet and ta. When standing in combination, pet always meant the upper region and ta always meant the region below. These are the accepted literal meanings of the combined words. In the pyramid text, we find the night bark of Ra sailing over Pet, the upper region. But what is the sun god doing above at night? Thou sailest on high in the evening barge means literally in the phase of dimming, above. It's not literally our night. The ship was depicted above in the literal phase of dimming, mistranslated as a night journey. The upper region, Pet, was also represented by the arching body of the goddess Nut, and we see the ship in its so-called night journey moving up and across the region of Pet, the region above. And it's a wonder that virtually no one has asked, why is the ship above in this phase of the daily cycle, when the solar mythologists have claimed for a century and a half that the god crosses below the land at night to the place of sunrise. In contrast, the so-called day ship occupied the lower region, contradicting all standard treatments of the subject. The best way to test an extraordinary idea is to force the reasoning to its extreme, where logical implications can be confronted in the most explicit terms. If an idea is fundamentally incorrect, the extreme cases will invariably reduce the idea to absurdity. In fact, the ship of heaven gives us some excellent examples of the logical tests. Just imagine the situation faced by ancient sky worshippers looking back to the age of the gods, but with inadequate conceptual tools to comprehend the symbolic language. The crescent above, when interpreted mythically as a ship, would surely have provoked some enigmatic Egyptian responses to the afterlife journey of the king in this cosmic ship. How would the celebrants of this journey regard a ship that was inverted, upside down, as it traversed the upper region. In fact, to the Egyptians, the journey above, the so-called night crossing, was fraught with peril. But why? There's an irony in the way the Egyptian priests sought to protect the king upon his death from things clearly remembered about this envisioned voyage with Ra across the upper region. Exactly as we would expect, the texts convey a fear of traveling upside down during this passage. So there's a spell for not traveling upside down in the realm of the dead, and one says simply, not to walk upside down. I will not be head downwards amongst those who are head downwards, reads another text. The king will not be hanged head downwards. The deceased declares, it is the night bark and the day bark. I am not upside down in the presence of Ra. The idea of a ship sailing upside down is well worth tracing to its origins, and the artistic traditions do not disappoint us, but they must be followed back in time to their archaic roots. In later times, when texts describe the ship's journey above in the literal phase of dimming, the words are mistranslated as a night journey, a blatant contradiction. For us, however, the problem is that the ship was shown upright, not inverted, as our reconstruction requires. But the more archaic tradition we are looking for comes from the papyrus of Amenhotep in the Cairo Museum. In the second scene depicted on the papyrus, the goddess Nut is shown in the usual arched or semicircular fashion as representative of the upper portion of the ship's circuit. And the ship of the sun itself is depicted in its night journey crossing the body of the goddess. But here, unlike the more familiar versions of later times, the ship is not upright, but inverted. And so we ask, is it possible that the graphic image speaks for an original tradition, later distorted out of a royal fear of traveling upside down? The answer comes from hieroglyphic evidence that preceded by many centuries the more familiar artistic portrayals of the night journey. In spell 211 of the coffin text, this voyage, literally the phase of dimming, is described in the instruction to the newly deceased king. He is to learn the path of the right, Amentet, the ascending path, then to ferry across the upper region when the divine land is turned upside down. The position of the ship at this moment is presented in the hieroglyphic text. Not just the land of the gods, but the ship itself is upside down. Perhaps the idea that the land of the gods could be turned upside down is no less mystifying than the inversion of the ship, but when we realize that the crescent ship is the brightly illuminated portion of the divine land, we see that the inversion of the crescent in its so-called night position, literally the phase of dimming, would be viewed as an inversion of both the land and the ship. In our reconstruction of this ancient imagery, we've suggested that the ship revolved above and around a visible axial column remembered as the World Mountain, known globally under many names and mythic interpretations. If this conclusion is correct, we should expect a direct confirmation of the ship's connection to the mountain of the gods. Call it an inescapable prediction of the reconstruction. The Egyptian sources speak eloquently in confirming this very connection. In the words of the deceased king, the texts say, "I assume my pure seat which is in the bow of the bark of Ra. It is the sailors who convey Ra round about the mountain of fire and light, and it is they who will convey me around the mountain of fire and light." Hail, only one! Behold, thou art in the Sektet boat as it goeth round about the mountain of fire and light. In these quotes, I've used the literal reading of the Akut, the cosmic mountain, not the inaccurate and highly misleading translation of the mount as a mere horizon. That allows us to see the underlying symbolism in its integrity. As we've previously shown, the pillar and crescent mean the revolving arms of the pillar god, the horns of the bull of heaven, and the twin peaks of the world mountain, all predictably equated with the cosmic ship. So once more, we're brought back to our earlier admonition: do not believe in coincidences. The ability of a concrete reconstruction to predict explicit details when the details are simply absurd under common suppositions is not to be taken lightly. In fact, the contrasting phases of the ship of heaven in its daily journey will give us an ideal introduction to an even broader mythic theme: the cosmic twins, as figures of the revolving crescent in its archaic daily cycle. That will be the subject of our next discourse.